So, yeah, hi guys, I'm Joel. And Amber says hi, Joel, from her muted mic that she doesn't want recorded.
Hi, Joel.
But so I thought about preparing, and then I just hit a roadblock after roadblock after roadblock because normally, how do you prepare to tell your testimony or your story about Jesus? You go, okay, I need to do before and after. And honestly, if you ask me, like, when did you get saved? I'd be like, at some point in the last 31 years, I guess. But if you ask me exactly, I don't know when, I don't know. I don't really have a set point. And then, you ask, well, what's your before and after? Before I met Jesus, I was this, and after it was this. I don't have one of those either. Um, and so all the traditional kind of structures that apply to these stories just didn't apply to me at all. So as I'm trying to prepare and organize my thoughts and how do I tell my story? What is the story? It's just not something that's easily broken down like that. Because for me, I mean, we'd have to start with the question of, well, if you're asking me, when did you become a Christian? The first question we have to really answer is what does it mean to me to be a Christian? And then I can answer, when did that happen? When did I become that? So let's go there first, I guess. For what does it mean for me to be a Christian? It For me it means to try and be like Jesus. He left some pretty clear instructions, and if you read the Bible and kind of, you don't even have to study the commentaries, but it helps. You can see this image of someone who cares about other people more than anyone else. He cares more about other people than he cares about himself, which is obvious when he dies. Um, so to be a Christian is to try and be like that. Um, but I'm also a very, very logical. I think through things, and I have a hard time with people who make statements like, "Well, I just believe this," or it felt right. That doesn't appear really anywhere in my story. That's never a reason for the things that I believed. If we're going chronologically, I've kind of always been in church. My parents brought me up in a Christian home. Um, my dad wasn't always a Christian. He became a Christian before he had family and us and all that. I met my mom at church, but I was always growing up in a church or in some sort of a church environment. So I guess that makes it hard for me to say this is when I became a Christian. But I've gotten to see a lot of just people, and it's amazing how similar people in a church and people outside of a church really really are. So all these stories of before I met Jesus, after I met Jesus, I always look at those stories, and I don't mean any offense to anyone who has a story like that, because I absolutely know some very, very legitimate stories of before, after, and it's stark difference. But I always take it with a little grain of salt, because I know people from all aspects. I know some people who say, I'm a Christian, and I go, really? And I know some people who are like, no, I'm totally an atheist. God doesn't exist. Morality is subjective. And I go, but you're such a good person. You do all the same things that I do, basically, and I do it because I'm a Christian. Like, so it's not just about being good or not being bad, which, to some people are two distinctly different things. It's about being like Jesus, doing the things you want to do because you want to be like Jesus. Well, sorry, we got someone else joining us here. Let me let him in here. Anyways, he's joining. But back to what I was saying, I'm not a very, like, this feels right, or this I just believe it. I'm more logical than that. So growing up, it was tough because um, because I would hear that a lot. You go to church and Jesus loves you, and you'd sing songs, and it was meant to elicit emotional responses. And you'll see these concert like shows put on, and people get really emotional, and then they leave and they swear at the people that they're driving by on the way home because they cut in front of them, right? For me, it took a long time to really understand faith. I had to study and go, does this make sense? I was aware of other world religions and other belief systems and atheism, and I'm always weighing my beliefs as a Christian with all these other things that are going on in the world. So for me, it's sorry, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but going back to that, when did you become a Christian? My answer is every day. I become a Christian every day. At some point, I started doing that. Maybe it's been since I was 3 or 4 or whatever. The first time I think I ever prayed, I was in kindergarten in Temple Elementary School in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But I didn't really know anything. I just got caught up in the moment, and our teacher was very excited and all that stuff. But so my answer going back to that again is, when did you become a Christian? Every day. You know, there are days where I have bad days, and you wouldn't be able to tell I was a Christian because I just hate everybody and don't want to help anybody and ignore everyone who asks for help or tries to reach out to me, and then there are days where I'm completely altruistic. But that's just kind of the journey, and I hope that hearing stuff like this is an encouragement to people like me who don't really have the stark before and after. I never got into drugs or sleeping around or doing, I've never led a life of crime or anything like that. I've been pretty boring, honestly, for most of my life, and I plan to keep it that way. But at the same time, there is a little bit of a challenge because I have seen things happen in my life that I can't explain. Like a lot of people, and this is getting a little bit more personal, but like a lot of guys, I remember one very specific struggle when I was in high school and a little before. Pornography was a very, very difficult thing for me to deal with. It made me feel very good. It was easy. It was accessible. It was easy to hide. And then I realized it was causing, and I can't even tell you what made me realize this because I didn't talk to anyone about it. No one knew. My parents probably knew, but I didn't know they knew because they're smarter than I thought they were back then. But I didn't talk to anyone about it. So I honestly, I can't tell you how I realized this. And this is one of those things that if I heard myself say this years ago, I'd be like, that person's just attributing things to God that don't belong to God. But I don't have any other explanation for it. But at some point, somehow, I came to this sudden realization that this was changing the way that I viewed relationships. And this was changing the way that I responded to the people around me. I didn't really care about friendships with guys. I just wanted to be friends with girls, and I didn't really care about relationships. I just cared about, that was my goal. That's where I wanted to go. But and you might say, oh, that's just a high schooler. But at some point, I realized this is changing the way that I think. This is changing the way that I respond to how I feel. And I prayed, and I just want to stop because this is changing me in a way that I know is not natural or right. Like, I shouldn't be so focused on this. I don't want to do it anymore. And again, I didn't tell anyone about this. I didn't have an accountability partner or anything going on. And I tell you, it just stopped. It was weird. And if you know anyone who's had addictions, how many of them could say, I wanted it to stop and it just stopped? So that's just, I don't have a lot of stories like that, but that one is just something that I definitely wanted to share as an example. And I know it goes in contrast to needing a solid explanation for everything, but sometimes that's also how being a Christian works. It just things just happen, and you have got no other excuse for it. Um, so I guess that's the closest to the before and after as I get, but I guess I don't have a whole lot more for you guys. But I will say that God's used a lot of other circumstances in my life to keep me on track. I I remember another good example is when I was coming out of junior high, again about the same time. Um, I went on a trip, a family trip out to Texas, and we was traveling with some family friends, and they decided that they wanted to stop and see one of their mutual friends. And I'd never met this person, these people in my life. They were just friends of family friends, and it was their plan, and we were just tagging along. So we stopped and hang out with his family for a couple of days, and just randomly they decide they're such a musical family. They all play instruments. They introduced me to Josh Groban, and it was a good time. And the father in that family had brought out guitars and was like, "Hey, do you play guitar?" I was like, "No, I've literally never touched an instrument in my life." And get this, which is super ironic, I didn't like music. I didn't like listening to music. I didn't enjoy it at all. And spoiler alert for those who don't already know, I've been a worship leader for like 18 years or something now. So, and it started here at that house visit for those random people who were also very strong Christians. The guy's name was Jim Alexander. And we just played around, and he showed me some chords on a guitar, and he's like, "Actually, you have a good grip, and like you got some short fingers, but you can do it." And the next morning I woke up, he had left for work, we were about to pack up and leave, and there's a guitar by where I was sleeping with a note on it. And his note was just, "I couldn't sleep last night. I prayed, and God told me that you need this guitar, and you're going to be a worship leader, and you're going to do great things for God's kingdom." And I'm like 14. I'm like, "What?" I don't even like music. And I felt I was so frustrated at myself too, because I was bad at the guitar, because I'd never played it. Of course I was bad at it. But I'm the type of person who, if I'm not immediately really good at something, it's not for me. It's because I'm a terrible person and I'm worthless and I should just never do anything ever, and I give up. That's a personality trait, and it's stuck with me forever. But but he'd already left for work, so I couldn't say no and talk him out of it. The whole family was gone. It was just me and the family friends that I was traveling with on the way to Texas. So I didn't have a choice. I couldn't just leave it. So I took the guitar with me, and over the summer I just sat and I learned how to play. When I was bored, which was a lot, because trips to random family friends don't actually end up being that exciting when you're a teenager. So I just sat and I learned how to play. And then when we got back, my youth pastor had heard that I was playing and just put me on the worship team, because he knew I couldn't say no to anyone who asked me to do something. And at that point, I can say that I probably would have stopped going to church, because at that point I had enough freedom in my life to go do other things that were more fun. So you could say it was circumstance, or you could say that God kept me there by putting something in my life that I didn't expect and didn't know and would never have chosen on my own, to keep me there because he knew I would leave and he didn't want me to. So I was on the worship team, barely playing the right chords most of the time. And then I was playing with this guy named Stetson, who I'm still friends with and all that stuff. But he was super talented, could play everything, and he was a good singer and like a good looking guy, and all the girls liked him. And I would just sit in the back and play guitar, barely. And then one day he just didn't show up. He just stopped showing up. He was the worship leader. He just stopped showing up, and Jeff's like, all right, I guess you're doing it. And of course, I don't know how to say no. So I did. And then next week he didn't show up again, and so I did it. And that's how I became worship leader, guys. And I've just been doing that every week since then. And just practicing guitar and playing, getting better and better. And that whole time, there are so many times where I knew, looking back, I knew if I didn't have that role and those people weren't relying on me, I would have left a long time ago. So here's another point for this whole ramble that I'm subjecting you to, is that sometimes being a Christian isn't necessarily about being in love with the church, or sometimes even thinking about God or being in love with God. Sometimes it's just God saying, I won't let you go. And he's going to put things there to keep you. And it's not a forceful thing. I never felt forced to do anything. It was just, he just knew how to keep me there. And there really isn't another explanation for it, because how does someone randomly give you a guitar and tell you why and what you're going to do, and you have no interest, no ability, and then it just happens like so quickly like that? And I'm still a worship leader, and I plan to be for however long I'll be relevant to the youths, I guess, which is probably going to be only a couple more years because I'm getting old. But in that, it was also such a good learning opportunity just to see how sometimes it seems like nothing really makes sense, and then you get to a point and you look back and go, that was such a clear path. How did I not see that before? And then from there on, so many things have happened. I was the worship leader in the youth, and then we had another church service, and they needed the worship team to step into that and lead it for like a larger service. And then we planted a church, and honestly, it's shaped what I've done in school. I studied music production a little bit in school, and then organizational leadership as I needed to. And here we are now into our second year of COVID, doing online, and all of the things that I'd learned and all of the leadership skills that I'd learned, and just how to be flexible and how to just roll with whatever's coming. If I didn't have all of that, I would never have been able to help us get to where we are here right now. So it's more of an amazing story when you lay it all out. But I hope it's made sense. Even though I don't have a stark, this is the day I became a Christian, and this is who I am now because of it. I will say that sometimes I don't understand how I'm being so patient with people, because I don't want to be, and yet I am. Or sometimes I just can't stop, I can't stop thinking about something like, why do I care about that so much? And then I dig into it and I find out I'm the perfect fit to fix that issue, and then it's resolved. There's a lot of things like that. And then I guess I'll close out with this, so I don't just ramble on too far, because I really did not structure this at all. But the final thing is what I've realized is probably the most important aspect for me being a Christian is God's always going to give me, and I believe he's always going to give you, a choice on what you want to believe. You could look at the things that happened to me in high school and say, oh, you just had a weird strike of willpower and overcame your issues. And you could look at this progression of this whole learning guitar and become a worship leader, and those things keeping me involved in the church when I totally would have walked away otherwise. And it also kept me moral character, because if I behaved outside of the expected Christian behaviors, they wouldn't have had me up there leading worship. They would have told me I can't do it anymore. So that honestly sometimes was the only reason I behaved well and didn't go off and do this thing, or But so you can look at all those and say, oh, that's so circumstantial, or oh, it just happened, and there's billions of people on earth. Of course this happens to someone. Yeah, maybe, but it happened to me, and I'm a Christian. So you're always going to have a choice of whether you want to believe it's just circumstance or just this or whatever, or God's real and he does things in our lives, maybe indirectly, maybe directly, but you're always going to have a choice on what you want to believe. So that's kind of where I want to end this. I appreciate having all your attention this long, but I'm going to stop the recording now. If you're seeing this and you're not already hanging out on Wednesday nights with us, this is the kind of conversation that we have on those nights. So join us for that, because you'll get to hear all the questions that now, if you're just watching this recording, you won't. So I will end it with a quick prayer, and then I'll stop it and we'll have a discussion. Lord, you have worked in my life in odd ways that sometimes are hard for me to recognize until much later. But I pray that you would use my experiences and my story and just the things that I've gone through to help other people see some of the things that you do. I pray that you would use this as an encouragement to anyone who might have a story that's similar, that doesn't have all the bullet points of testimony that we run into so often. Pray that you would just be with those people who are watching this, who stuck through my ramblings, and you would keep this on their minds and just continue to work with them and speak with them. In your name, amen.